I first met Daniel when I was searching for a roommate to help with rent. Living alone in the city was too expensive, and I needed someone to split the costs. When Daniel responded to my ad, he seemed like the perfect choice, kind, polite, and easygoing. He had a warm smile, a calm voice, and a considerate nature that quickly put me at ease. From the very start, everything was great. He was clean, helpful, and even took care of small repairs around the apartment. Sometimes he would cook dinner for both of us or cover chores I disliked, like taking out the trash. We both worked nearby, Daniel at a bookstore, me at a coffee shop. And in the evenings, we'd watch movies or chat about our day. It felt like I had found the perfect roommate. For a while, life was simple. Then, small things started to change. At first, I didn't notice anything strange. Daniel was still friendly and polite, but small things felt different. He started coming home late, often looking exhausted or distracted. If I asked where he had been, he'd just shrug and say, "With friends." But something in his tone felt off. Some nights I heard him talking on the phone in hushed whispers. Once I overheard him saying something about risk and people not finding out. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, that maybe I had misunderstood. But as time passed, the unease inside me grew. Then one night, I came home late to find the apartment in complete darkness, except for a dim light coming from Daniel's room. As I passed by, I heard a sound that made my stomach drop. Quiet sobbing. I hesitated, then knocked on his door. "Hey, you okay?" There was a long pause before he finally answered. "Yeah, I'm just tired. I'm going to sleep." Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the crying stopped. The next morning, Daniel acted like nothing had happened. He made small talk over breakfast, smiled like always. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. As days passed, I started noticing more strange things. Daniel's clothes often had small stains on them, dark, reddish-brown, as if he had spilled something. When I asked, he laughed it off, saying he had cut himself while cooking. Then one day, I made a chilling discovery. I was looking for some medicine in our bathroom cabinet when my fingers brushed against something sharp. Pulling it out, I saw a small knife, with dried blood on the blade. My stomach twisted. I confronted Daniel about it that night. He barely reacted. "Oh, that? Yeah, I told you, I cut my hand." He showed me a faint scar on his palm and chuckled. "Relax, man. You're acting weird." But I felt weird. The atmosphere in the apartment had changed. There was a heaviness in the air, an unshakable tension that made my skin crawl. Every night I lay in bed unable to sleep, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. I wasn't. One evening, Daniel left the apartment saying he'd be out late. My curiosity finally got the better of me. My hands trembled as I opened the door to his room. Inside, everything looked normal. But something told me to keep searching. I opened his closet, rummaged through his drawers, and then, under a pile of clothes, I found a small locked box. Breaking it open, I froze. Inside were old newspaper clippings, articles about unsolved murders. Each article had handwritten notes in the margins, scribbled thoughts that made my blood run cold. And then, among them, were photographs. Photos of the victims. Some of them looked like they had been taken in secret before the murders. Others were crime scene pictures marked with red ink. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel wasn't just hiding secrets. He was the secret. My pulse pounded in my ears as I shoved everything back into the box. I needed to get out. Now. I ran out of the apartment and called the police from a nearby park. When they arrived, I led them straight to Daniel's room. The officers examined the evidence carefully, their faces darkening as they flipped through the clippings and notes. "We need you to stay somewhere safe," one of them advised. "We'll investigate this immediately." I packed a bag and stayed with a friend, trying to go about my normal life. But I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. Days later, the police called me. They had arrested him. Daniel had been caught trying to dispose of items linked to another victim. The evidence in our apartment, combined with what they found on him, connected him to multiple unsolved murders. I felt relief. I felt shock. But most of all, I felt fear. I had been living with a murderer. When I returned to the apartment to pack up my things, the place felt different. The air was heavy, like it still held the weight of Daniel's secrets. As I sorted through my belongings, I found something on my bed. A note. "I'm sorry you found out this way. I never wanted to hurt you. You were the only real friend I had. Goodbye." My hands shook as I read the words. Were they genuine? Or just another manipulation? I left the apartment and never looked back. Moving to a new city helped, but the memories followed me. I became more cautious, less trusting. Even now, I always look for signs of danger in the people around me, because I know the truth. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it wears a friendly smile. I was 30 when I decided to find a cheaper place to live. My old apartment was getting too expensive and I needed a quick solution. That's when I came across an ad for a room in a 3-bedroom house. The rent was surprisingly low, and the landlord, Mr. Thompson, didn't ask many questions. He didn't even run a background check, which seemed strange, but I was in a hurry and couldn't afford to be picky. The house itself was old, with creaking floors and narrow hallways, but it had a certain charm. When I toured the place, Mr. Thompson quickly showed me around. 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a cozy living room, and a shared bathroom. He barely mentioned the rules, only telling me that my roommate's name was Elizabeth. That same afternoon, I signed the lease and moved in. As I placed my boxes in my new room, I felt a slight chill in the air. The house was old, sure, but something about it made me uneasy. I told myself it was just my imagination. Elizabeth worked night shifts, so she was rarely home when I was. In my first month living there, I never even saw her once. Her door was always closed, and I never heard a sound from her room. Despite her absence, I often felt like I wasn't alone in the house. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, just the natural discomfort of living with someone I had never met. Then, strange things started happening. I would leave my keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them later on the dining table. My toothbrush, which I kept in a cup by the sink, sometimes felt damp even when I hadn't used it. I tried to convince myself it was just forgetfulness. Maybe I was misplacing things. Maybe the house had small drafts that shifted objects. But as the days passed, my unease grew. One evening, I returned home from work and noticed something strange. The front door was slightly open. I was certain I had locked it before leaving that morning. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. The house was silent, but there was something off about the air, like someone had been there just moments before. "Hello," I called out. No response. That night, I triple-checked every lock on the doors and windows. But as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Then, late at night, I started hearing sounds. Light footsteps on the second floor. A soft humming, almost like a lullaby. It sent chills down my spine. Elizabeth wasn't supposed to be home. And if she was at work, then who was making those sounds? That Friday night, I decided to unwind in the living room, trying to push my paranoia aside. I turned on the TV and sipped my tea, telling myself everything was fine. Then, I felt it. A prickling sensation ran down my spine. I was being watched. I turned my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat. In the dimly lit hallway, a figure stood in the shadows. Elizabeth. She wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. I couldn't see her eyes clearly in the darkness, but I felt them on me. For a long, tense moment, neither of us spoke. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared down the hall. My hands trembled as I set down my tea. What the hell was going on? That night, I barely slept. Every small noise sent a chill through me. By morning, I had made up my mind. I needed to leave. I packed a small bag and checked into a nearby motel. Once I felt safer, I called Mr. Thompson and told him everything. The eerie sounds, The misplaced objects, and most of all, the way Elizabeth had just stood there in the dark. He was silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "Are you okay?" His voice was calm, but something in his tone felt off, like he wasn't surprised. "Who is she?" I pressed. Instead of answering, he sighed. "Come by tomorrow and pack up your things. It's probably best if you move out." That only made my fear worse. The next day, I forced myself to return to the house. It felt different, quieter, heavier, as if something unseen was watching me. I moved quickly, packing my clothes and essentials, determined to leave as soon as possible. But as I passed by Elizabeth's room, I noticed her door was slightly open. For the first time, I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I pushed the door open. Dust-covered surface. The bed was perfectly made, but it looked untouched, like no one had slept in it for years. Then I saw them. Old photographs on the wall. Stepping closer, my throat. The woman in the photos was Elizabeth, but the dates on the pictures were from 20 years ago. My pulse pounded as I flipped over one of the photos. It had a handwritten note on the back. Elizabeth Thompson, 1999. Gone or forgotten. I barely had time to process what I was seeing when I heard a faint creak behind me. Spinning around, I found the room empty. But I knew. I wasn't alone. My hands trembled as I held the old photograph. Elizabeth had been dead for 20 years. I turned and ran out of the room, my heart hammering. I needed answers. I drove straight to Mr. Thompson's office and slammed the photograph onto his desk. He paled. His hands shook as he picked it up. Finally, after a long silence, he confessed. Elizabeth was his sister. She had disappeared 2 decades ago. Her body was never found, but he had never been able to let go. He had kept her room untouched, just in case she ever came back. "But I saw her," I whispered. "She was there." Mr. Thompson didn't reply. I left the house that night and never returned. To this day, I don't know what I encountered in that house. A ghost? A lingering presence? Something else entirely? All I know is this: not all roommates are living. When I first moved into my new apartment, I thought I had found the perfect place. It was affordable, close to my job, and I only had one roommate, Alex. Something about him felt off from the start. He was tall and thin, with eyes that seemed to look past me, as if he saw things I couldn't. He rarely left his room, and when he did, he barely spoke. At first, I assumed he was just introverted. But then, the whispers started. Late at night, I would hear him mumbling in his room. At first, I thought he was talking on the phone. But as the nights passed, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, like he was speaking to someone who wasn't there. At first, I tried to ignore the whispers. Maybe Alex was just talking to himself, or maybe he was into weird meditation practices. I told myself it wasn't my business. But then the smell started. At first, it was faint, a musty, unpleasant odor. But soon, it became overpowering, seeping through the walls like something rotting. I couldn't pretend it was normal anymore. One night, I finally confronted Alex. "Hey man, what's that smell?" He stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed, low and hollow. "I spilled something," he said. "I'll clean it up." But he never did. And the smell only got worse. The whispers continued. The smell worsened. And then one night I saw it. I couldn't sleep, so I got up to get some water. As I passed Alex's door, I noticed it was slightly open, a sliver of dim light spilling into the hallway. Curiosity got the best of me. I peeked inside. Alex was standing in the center of his room, surrounded by lit candles. Their flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. He held an old yellowed book, chanting in a deep, strange voice. I didn't recognize the language. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, something hunched and twisted lurked in the candlelight. Its eyes glowed unnaturally, locked onto Alex like it was waiting for him to finish. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. Alex turned his head slightly as if he had sensed me. I ran to my room and locked the door. Something was terribly wrong. The next morning I hoped the daylight would erase the horrors of the night before. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had just been half asleep. But when I stepped out of my room, Alex's door was wide open. His room was empty. No candles, no strange books, no eerie presence in the corner. Just a bare mattress and a musty, lingering scent in the air. I searched the entire apartment, but Alex was nowhere to be found. His things were gone, like he had never lived there at all. I should have felt relieved, but instead I felt something much worse. Dread, because somehow I knew Alex wasn't gone. Not really. Days passed. I tried to convince myself that Alex had simply moved out without telling me. Maybe he was just that strange. But then the noises started. Late at night, I would hear faint scratching inside the walls. At first, I told myself it was just mice. But the sound grew louder, more deliberate, like something with sharp claws trying to break through. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a whisper, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have watched." I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest. But my room was empty. The shadows in the corners felt darker than before, and the scratching in the walls never stopped. The watcher in the dark. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned off the lights, I felt eyes on me, cold and unblinking. The shadows in my room seemed to stretch longer, like they were reaching for me. One night, I gathered enough courage to check the walls. Maybe there was something I was missing, an opening, a vent, something that could explain the strange noises. But as I ran my fingers along the wall, I felt something different. A cold, clammy hand brushed against mine from the other side. I jerked my hand away, heart racing. There was something, someone, on the other side of the wall. The next few days were a blur of unease. The hand on the other side of the wall had shaken me to my core, but it wasn't the worst of it. At night, I would lie in bed trying to sleep, but something kept me awake. The air in the room felt heavier, thicker. It felt as though there was someone, or something, right beside me, breathing just inches from my face. One evening, as I lay in the dark, I finally gathered enough courage to speak aloud. "Who are you? What do you want?" The room was silent, but then I heard it. A low, guttural voice, not from any specific direction, but just everywhere. "I am always here." The walls trembled, and the shadows seemed to shift. Something was growing stronger in the room, something I couldn't escape. I couldn't take it anymore. The relentless whispering, the oppressive feeling of being watched, it was breaking me. I decided to do something I should have done from the start. I called Alex. When he picked up, his voice was eerily calm. Too calm. "Why haven't you told me what's going on?" I demanded. He paused for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold. "You should never have watched it." I froze. "The video," he continued, "it doesn't end until you do." I felt the room grow colder as the walls seemed to close in around me. The air, once thick with dread, now felt suffocating. "What video?" I asked, but it was already too late.